my name is Antonis, and I'm very happy to welcome you in this action of Amnesty International's student group. I have with me Vasya, which is an activist in the student groups, and Miriam Correa Zamora, who is a social worker and a former PSS manager in the refugee camps of Lesbos, and Anastasia Moratidu, who is a MSc psychotherapist. We will start with Miriam, and I would like to ask you about the situation inside the camps and how the situation can affect the asylum seekers and the refugees.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. Well, I think that when it comes to Lesbos, because here is the island where I am based, we need to take into consideration the fact that the crisis has lived a huge change in the past year. Before we had Moria, and now we have Mavrovouni. The camp has shifted in a very different environment and situation. When Moria was operative, we thought that the situation wasn't dignifying enough. There was no space between tents. There were tents besides ASO boxes, a lot of tents. Many people were not registered. Many people got lost. Some people didn't get enough NFI. Some people didn't get enough food. And then we thought that it really couldn't get worse. Now, COVID hit the island in a very harsh way. The worst that could happen was the fact that refugees got in lockdown since March until September. They didn't receive any clarifications on when would they stop being in lockdown. And despite the fact that the Greek community and international community in Lesbos were free to go out, they would still not be allowed to go out. So refugees were put in lockdown for many months without any sort of recreational, educational activities, nothing at all. Basic emergency response, and that was it. So this created a very complicated and complex environment. At the beginning of September 2020, the fire started in Moria, and whole Moria got destroyed within a few hours. So almost 7,000 refugees were left in the street for 2 weeks until the new camp was set up. And this new camp hosts, at the moment, almost 7,000 refugees. And yes, there is distance between tents, but the conditions are slightly worse. There is this structural violence that less organizations have presence in the camp because most of them couldn't fight the Greek bureaucratical system and couldn't actually get registered in Greece. Because of that, we went from having a very good pathway of activities and organizations in the camp, inside and outside, from having 0 organizations outside doing group activities and very little organizations having the permit to do something inside. So basically, refugees get food and water twice a day. Showers are same conditions as in Moria, like really bad, not enough, not clean. Same with the toilets, and the same problem with rubbish, the same problem with the running water. I think that the most shocking thing about the new camp is seeing people not being able to do absolutely anything throughout the day. While in Moria before, it was very different because women and children at least could be busy from 8 a.m. until 8 p.m. if they wanted. There were so many NGOs and so many kind of activities to do. But now there is just not this possibility given the fact of this Greek registration process, but also the COVID restrictions. So the situation has gotten way worse for them. And I think that Anastasia can give us a lot more background on that and how that can affect a child's mind, because time doesn't run at the same speed for a child than for an adult. So a child who is doing nothing for 2 or 3 years in a row, it can be really devastating.
Well, I think that from a psychological perspective, the gist of what Miriam was discussing is that the experience of trauma. And what happens with the refugee population is that there is pre-existing trauma in their homelands, meaning famine, torture, war, the journey, the decision to leave their home, the loss of family or friends, acquaintances in this process. And then there is the migration trauma, which is more recurrent. And this is what we say that it causes this high risk effect on this population, which is mostly related to deportation processes and the uncertainty of when things are going to be complete, how long am I going to stay here, what is going to happen. And then it has to do with the condition in the camps per se, because a camp becomes somehow a small form of society. So we see many different kinds of behaviors developing there regarding the mental effect of the condition and how it's affected in the camps, the acculturation anxiety, because a camp might accommodate people from various backgrounds, other national refugee groups, and maybe these processes are also really hard to go through. It's a very confusing experience that takes time, and it can really elevate levels of anxiety. It can be very threatening. Now, when it comes to children, and I will pay special attention to this, things are even more, the risk is more eminent. Developmentally, children are go through various processes. Many things psychologically haven't been crystallized, and they're in a constant state of development. Two things are very important to say, that they're both in a state of threat emotionally, but they're also in a state of threat biologically, as they have minimal access to food and shelter many times. This happens in adults as well. Now let's see what happens to children. A child, first of all, needs some kind of guardian and protection. And what we see is that we have children that either come with their families as member of the family, but we also have many unattended minors. In the case of children that comes with their families, we see parents who, because of their trauma and the situation within the camps, they are unable to attend the emotional needs of their children. And this can have serious effect, what we call in psychology the attachment style, which is, as you're growing older, how you learn to attach and relate to other people. And also what is very important from my psychological perspective, their emotional regulation, how we learn to cope with situation and emotion, something that we see that many times they haven't developed the skills to deal with certain emotions and situations effectively. Also, we see children who have lost completely their guardians and their parents. They have witnessed death or life-threatening experiences. And apart from that, we also see children who come here on their own as unattended minors, and they're trapped, literally trapped sometimes, waiting for processes to go through so they can go and meet family members in another European country. Which is also very anxiety provoking for them, their children, and they already don't have this sense of control that an adult has.
Now I would like to continue and to pose some certain questions. First to Miriam, I would like to ask you, how long does the residence permit last, and what is the waiting time inside the camp?
Yeah, well, you're asking for permit and the wait, which are two different processes, because not all refugees are going to get a permit.
Of course.
So we're going to start with the wait, which is something that all of them are going to go through. According to official data, updated data, it takes 44 days between, an average of 44 days between the arrival of the refugee and its registration. It takes 281 days between the registration and the first decision instant. So the first decision instant is basically if they are going to be an official refugee or not. It takes 281 days from the registration to this decision of being considered a refugee from the authorities. And the whole process of between arriving in the island until you are assessed as a refugee can take an average of 10.3 months. Now, this is not really happening most of the time. Also, according to official data, 81.6% of the refugees coming here are not going through this experience. It's not taking for them 44 days to be registered. It's not taking for them 281 days to receive their decision. It's not happening. And 81.6% is a very big number. So I think that we need to see what is happening, where is the reality. Now, according to my experience and my communication with all sorts of organizations and my work in the island for the past 3 years, we've never seen a refugee waiting for less than 2 years inside the camp. And we have seen refugees waiting for 4 years inside the camp, 3 years easily. We've never seen a refugee get their decision in 1 year. Everything that is happening under that 81.6% is against any human, it's a violation of every human right. And of course, it's against the European policy, the current policy that we have, which on paper, it looks good. I'm not against it, but in reality, it's not really working because we have this official data, but it's not happening like that. People arrive and yes, they get registered, but some of them don't get registered immediately or after 44 days. Actually, when I was working inside the camp, and the organization that I work with had a specific program where they would map minors and accompanying minors in the camp. We found out that many of them hadn't even been registered and they had been living there for 6-9 months. Unaccompanied minors living in the olive groves outside the camp. This has devastating consequences in the life of these people, not even being registered, recognized by someone, just being out there without any sort of support or company, always in danger, and of course being attacked by other people and taken advantage of because they were minors. So people who were not registered happen, people who haven't had an interview after 2 years happens. Actually, since the beginning of 2020, interviews are being scheduled after 2 years. So these numbers are not really up to date. These official numbers are not happening at all. People are getting their interviews after 2 years and people are waiting for 2, 3, and 4 years.
Give us some specific examples of the mental issues that they are facing. And we have heard in the news and the social media about the chronic sleep and a lot of suicide commits. So if you would like to inform us about that.
Yes, of course, you will imagine that in this state, many emotions rise, right? Now, the development of a specific condition has to do with many factors, with how long, for example, a person has been in the camps, how serious or how many traumas has experienced beforehand. The age, for example, it's different for someone to be an adult, but it's also different for someone to be a child of 3 and 4 years or an adolescent. And usually we see in research, and this is very interesting, that adolescents have greater difficulty getting used to the environments and adapting somehow. In general, however, according to statistics, what we usually see from a clinical perspective is development of symptoms related to PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, anxiety, and depression. Starting from PTSD is having experienced trauma or witnessed a traumatic and life-threatening experience, and having the fear of either recalling the event, fear that the event will happen, avoiding specific stimuli that, for example, might be being close to crowds or loud sounds. You have these startle responses, restlessness, you have issues related to your sleeping patterns, or gain or loss of weight. What is common in children is specifically sleep disturbances. We see bedwetting, or we see nightmares. These are things that usually come as symptoms in smaller children who have not developed the way to verbalize specific, how they experience specific situations. When it comes to anxiety and depression, once again, The development of the symptoms vary according to the age of the individual. In younger children, again, we see overall, when we see a child that suddenly their behavior changes, we should be alarmed. Either guardians or protectors or parents. Usually parents are those who complain that their children have changed. Once again, we see children that cry too much. We see people who withdrawn in themselves. We see self-wedding even in older ages, bedwetting. And when it comes to younger, to older minors, we see behaviors, and this is very important, such as aggressive behavior and self-harm. Now, I want to emphasize on self-harm because you mentioned suicidality. Not every self-harm refers to an endeavor for someone to commit suicide. This is a myth somehow. There is the risk of suicidality, but this is not a behavior that is straightly related to wanting to end one life. So self-harm is something that is very common in refugee population, both younger but also adult. Usually self-harm is a way of emotional regulation. As we said before, especially in younger individuals, it's really hard for them to communicate the intensity of their emotions to their caregivers. So you mentioned also chronic sleep. This is called the resignation symptom, and it's a rare condition that is relatively new. There are mostly cases in Sweden and some in Australia. There are just a few. That's why we're talking about case studies, and we don't have clear statistics yet. So there are kids who suddenly fell in a state of coma. They were not reacting to stimuli, environmental stimuli such as pain or cold, and they did not have the ability to stand on their feet, walk, so they were just laying down and being taken care of.
So in order to conclude, I will pose some questions to both of you, and I would like you to both make some comments upon these matters. So the question is, how easy is to integrate within the Greek society, of course, for the ones that got accepted from the Greek government, and what can be done, what are the solutions from the side of the Greek society to resolve these problems, these kinds of matters?
It's really important to start addressing the psychosocial needs of refugee population. So exactly because this is a very difficult process, I think it's very important for the government, and I think organizations are putting effort, but it's really hard when you have so many numbers of covering psychosocial needs with counseling, therapy, but also processes of acculturation stress, of better integration in the system, especially when it comes to kids and their education.
I agree with Anastasia. I think that we need to create, the government needs to create, and policies need to be put in place in order to facilitate sustainable solutions, because it doesn't matter how much emergency response program we do and how much, providing food and tents. I mean, these solutions are not sustainable. Dignifying refugees and trying to build a process of integration into the community that is receiving them is the way, because otherwise what happens is that we have the international and the Greek community on one side and the refugee community completely isolated in a refugee camp, isolated, without communication and not a good integration. At the moment, we have a big, at least on Lesbos, the rate of racism is pretty high and refugees are not welcome. The 60 children of the camp who are attending public school, only 60 children, are being rejected by the teachers and by the other students. So there is a lot of work to be done in terms of social education there, in both sides, of course, because we're talking about very different cultures. And so I think that there is a lot of social work and social education to be done, lots of programs to be done in order to ensure that refugees are integrated, because what we're seeing is that organizations like UNHCR provide accommodation, for example, for a while, but when they cut that support, refugees are left without any ways to sustain themselves, whether if we do something like what Anastasia is proposing, refugees get empowered enough and build social and emotional skills in order to have a social integration in society, understand how to go to the bank, how to ask for an appointment in the doctor, how to address a situation in a restaurant with a Greek waiter. Think very simple things that can help them build capacity in order to integrate in the society. And the examples that I know, sadly, are not very successful. And the only successful ones that I know are successful because they had incredibly good luck and support from other people. People who, volunteers and international members of the community who gave them a house to stay or paid for their rent, or people who accompanied them from place to place in order to fix their paper, or people who paid for a lawyer, or people who had a family somewhere else. These are the successful cases, but they were incredibly lucky. And these are like 10% of the refugees that I know. Sadly, it's not better in other countries. I know of refugees that I used to work with who are in Germany and England now, and they have to start the whole process again another interview, and again another asylum process. It's re-traumatizing again because they have to go through everything that happened in the journey and in their countries again, and it's not granted that they're gonna have this status. So how sustainable are the solutions at the moment? I don't think they are very sustainable. I think they are a bit lacking. And if they are put in place, they are a bit paternalistic. But sustainability, I believe, is the future.